Welcome to the Cold Steel Surgical Podcast with your hosts Amir Farouk and Chad Ball.
We're really excited to bring you talks that we recorded as part of the CANUCS Surgical Fellows course. CANUCS is a national organization that stands for Canadian Collaborative on Urgent Care Surgery, and they've been doing some amazing work in understanding emergency general surgery and trauma in Canada. Dr. Chad Ball and Dr. Kelly Vogt were instrumental in bringing together some really fantastic speakers back in April of 2024 to talk about the critical knowledge and skills that surround obtaining a staff job, as well as being successful both personally and professionally in a demanding career. This was a really fabulous course aimed at surgical fellows. Dr. Ashlie Nadler is an assistant professor at the University of Toronto and practices at Sunnybrook Hospital. She has unique training in both acute care surgery as well as surgical oncology. In this talk, she examines the adage of being available, affable, and able as a mantra for success in a surgical career, the delicate art of saying no.
It's my real privilege to introduce to you guys Dr. Ashlie Nadler, who is an expert in acute care surgery and here to provide us some amazing perspectives. Dr. Nadler and I are like almost parallel paths in terms of age, but she's taken such an amazing path to becoming the acute care surgery lead at Sunnybrook, where she currently works, including a surgical oncology fellowship in the U.S. And I suspect some of that it's definitely informing her perspective today while she talks to us, and I got to read it because I'm going to screw it up. Should we still aim to be affable, available, and able? So thank you so much, Dr. Nadler.
Thanks so much, and thank you for inviting me to speak today. So I think this ties in really well with the previous talk we just heard about culture and kind of what culture should we have, especially as we look at becoming colleagues and staff surgeons. What should we be focusing on? Many of you may have heard this adage that a physician is judged by the 3 A's: availability, affability, and ability. And so is this really what we should strive for? And I think I'm going to try and talk about kind of a balance of those things, if that exists. But that, yes, I think these are things that are important as we move forward throughout our careers. But I think that sometimes we take on too much of these things. And so I'm going to go through some of my experience, and hopefully you can learn from that, because there's definitely areas that I may have made different choices knowing what I know now. But at the same time, I think a lot of the things that I took on, even if they weren't things that I thought were going to be the most valuable, may have led to other opportunities or may have provided other advantages that weren't kind of obviously immediate initially. So I think we all have competing interests, and you see this as a resident, as a fellow, as a staff. As a staff, you have a bit more control over your time because you're not necessarily reporting to like the staff surgeons on your team all the time. So you have a little bit more flexibility in that sense, but you also have more responsibilities that are put on you. So it's always a balance between all the things that we need to take care of in our lives. Actually, balance isn't a great word because I don't think there is a balance. I think it's choosing where you put your time and where you focus your energies, but you can't be the best at everything that you do. So you have to look at where you're going to put your efforts. So clinical is probably going to be one of the most demanding things as it is now, but that's the easiest thing to add into your practice, because you may start with a low referral base. You may start where you're not doing as much in terms of volumes, or you may not have as much OR time as you're ultimately going to get, but that easily kind of ramps up over time, and then that takes up a huge component of your time. If you're in an academic setting, you may also have academic or research requirements, education for either yourself, continuing education, or for residents and students, and that may be kind of mandated in talks at your hospital, but it may be in bigger roles in terms of education. Mentorship for, again, residents, colleagues, having your own time to get mentorship in your practice. And then time for your colleagues and how you balance work with your colleagues in terms of that interaction. And then very important is obviously time for yourself, your family, and your friends. So how do you fit that all in? So you can see these are all things that are going to compete for your time, but you only have a given amount of time in a day or a week. So I want to talk about affability. I think in many ways, this is my greatest strength and probably my greatest weakness. I probably have made a career to a great extent, not only on kind of my accomplishments, but being affable, because I think that I take on lots of opportunities. Clearly I'm here on a Saturday giving this talk, and people know that I'm willing to do that. There obviously has to be some kind of like meat to that. So you can't just be affable and not be able, because you're probably not just going to keep given opportunities if you're not completing them. But I think this is a big thing that we look for in partners and colleagues. We want to know that people are going to get along well, work with a group, be collegial. But I think it often leads to a lot of opportunities, probably more than most of us can actually take on. So along with saying yes to things, you have to be able to say no at some point. There's actually a wiki, how to be affable. And so it had 10 points in terms of what affability looks like. So I'm just going to read this one because it's quite telling. Act as if you're energized even when you feel drained. A deadbeat person is certainly someone you wouldn't want around. Therefore, you should always act enthusiastic or at least awake, even if you have the desire to go to sleep at that very moment. Remember that this isn't lying. It's simply displaying a more positive disposition. So that's quite toxic description, I think, but I think we've sadly all been in that circumstance. The next point they make is that you should actually know when helping becomes somebody taking advantage of you. So even in the description of affability, they do recognize that there's limits to that. So it's how do you define and decide what your limits are and what you take on and what you don't take on. So this is a kind of I would say it's an incomplete list, but it's a large selection of what I've taken on since I started in 2017. So you can see it's a lot of roles, and there's varying time commitments and pressures with each of these roles that I've taken on in addition to being a surgeon. So I started as a clinical associate. So I spent 2 years before I was hired as full-time staff. So some of these I started in that role as an associate to basically show my worth, to show my availability, my affability, my ability, and kind of make that case that I was going to be hired on. So a lot of the things that I took on initially were basically to set my career up as I moved forward. And some of those things sounded great, and some of them maybe not so great, but I took them on because that's what people wanted me to do at the time. So quite a long list. And like I said, varying amounts of time for each. Like the med student tutor course is about 40 hours that I spend on that course a year. So that's quite significant if you don't want to be doing a med student course. And I think a lot of these things I reflect on that maybe when I took them on, they were a good idea and I enjoyed them. I actually won an award for that for teaching that course. So it did help me in my career. But now that I've done it for 4 or 5 years, I don't know that that's where I need to spend my time anymore. So it's looking at kind of what you've taken on for different reasons, and then when you need to shift gears if you've taken something on, and what you need to say no to. So I'm going to go through this list in terms of kind of what I actually wanted to do and where things have gotten me and why I did things that maybe I didn't want to do. So I think if I look at this list, these are the things that I actually really want to do. These are the things I enjoy doing. So you can see like about half the list is things that I was like, this is great. I really want to take this on. I'm super keen about these things. So that's great that a significant amount of the work that I'm doing is actually in line with what I want to be doing. But it also means that about half these things are not like my perfect kind of passion project that I wanted. So if we look at the rest of the list, what I did is a stepping stone. So you can see a lot of the things that weren't my kind of passion are highlighted here. But a lot of these things led me to something else. So a lot of these are quality improvement initiatives, education initiatives that are my focus in terms of my academic profile. And it's not that I didn't want to do them. I may have wanted to do them at the time, but then as things have transitioned on, I was like, do I really need to continue doing this? Or are these things that I can pass on or like think about like planning for somebody else to take on or take a bigger role rather than me taking that large role in these areas? And then some of them have led me to other roles. So a lot of these committees ultimately let me meet people in the hospital, let me become known for my leadership and my engagement and my affability. And then they ultimately have led me to bigger roles. So like, I don't think I just got a role as vice chief of surgery at my hospital, which is like super exciting. And I'm really excited to take that on. But I did a lot of these committees at the hospital that took up time and didn't pay because ultimately I was hoping that they would lead me to other opportunities, and they did. So I think that it's not that I wasted time. They were definitely all reasonable and helpful for me to get the roles that I have now. I'm looking now at promotion and thinking about, do any of these roles actually help or count towards promotion? And so it may be different based on your institution, but ours is looking at a national or international impact. So you can see very few things on the list actually have that impact. So even though I'm very successful locally at my hospital and at the University of Toronto, there's less things that count towards a national impact. And so I don't think this is something that I was necessarily advised on. People obviously locally are very happy if you want to take on opportunities and you want to be involved. And I'm always being asked to take on those opportunities, which is great. And that's where I felt fulfilled, is making a change where I'm working with the residents that I'm working with. But I think it's harder to know that I needed to have these bigger opportunities beyond that. I think some of the smaller things may have led to that in terms of doing local implementation of quality improvement, led to publications potentially, or led to talks across the country, but not always. So you can see there's very few things. So I think that had I kind of looked back, I may have looked for more of these opportunities or asked my mentors how I can be set up for more of these opportunities. But again, it depends where your focus is. Promotion was not my initial focus. So you kind of change and fluctuate throughout points in your career in terms of where you want to put your efforts. And then what pays. So this is usually the smallest category, unfortunately. And so I think that often there's some salary support for initial things that you take on, like research roles or other education roles if you're in an academic center, but very hard to get paid for many opportunities that you have. And I think even some of them are questionable. Like I put invited lectures. I think I've been paid once to do an invited talk. So most of the opportunities, unfortunately, that we have are not paying, but some of them you need to take on to supplement your income so that you can do the things that you want to do otherwise. So I think you can't look at it as everything I do, I should get paid for. I think we're getting better and people are looking at trying to supplement or find some sort of salary support for those things that we're doing on the side per se, because I think there's more and more recognition that your time is valuable and a salary that goes with that recognizes the value of your time. So you can see that it's very few, but I hope that this will change and continue to improve as we go on. Okay, so then those are all the things I said yes to. Then people see, oh, great, Ashley's going to do all these things. She's interested. She's available. So they offer me more and more things. So then I look at, well, do I actually want to take on these things? Do I have time for these things? And so this is just kind of a select list of things that I didn't necessarily take on or I said no to. And some of them were based on experience I had already working kind of in that area, like the QI course. I wasn't a great experience when I was a tutor for that course. So taking on that course in terms of being the lead or the director for that course, I was like, this is going to take me a lot of work to make changes. And I don't have the time to put in the effort to make it what I want to be. And so if there's somebody else who's going to make it significantly better and they have the time for that, that's great. But unfortunately, that's not going to be me. And then I think some of these roles were very research focused, especially at U of T. A lot of it is kind of, do you want to judge a poster? Do you want to review abstracts? Do you want to lead a research conference? And that really wasn't in my kind of portfolio of what my career is. So that's what I had to look at is what is my vision for my career and where do I actually want to spend my efforts? Because you can't do everything. So I think creating that niche for yourself and having that vision of what you actually want to focus in on is helpful, because then it's easier in some ways to say no if you have a hard time saying no, because you can say, thank you for the opportunity, but this really doesn't fit with my career plans at this point, or it doesn't fit with what I'm aiming to accomplish. So on that note, how to say no. I think you can thank people for the opportunity. I'm not great at saying no. I say yes to a lot of things, but I've had to learn this. So I hope that you can take my advice and kind of learn to say this earlier on. So thank them for the opportunity. It's often by email that you're getting these requests. Just say no. You don't have to have a reason. I will try and say this isn't in line with what I want or et cetera, but you don't have to give any reason. You can say no. And then it's often nice or kind to say, okay, I'm not available or I can't do that, but here's somebody who may be. You have to be careful with that because you don't want to just give a list of the same people who are always kind and take on roles. You don't want to put them in the same situation, but it's good to think kind of, are there people who would be a good fit for this who may actually want it? And it could be that you ask that person in advance, hey, somebody offered me this role. Is this something you'd be interested in? I'm going to put your name in for it, is also a good way to look at it. So that person's not put in the same situation. If it's really just a matter of like the current timing and it is something you might be interested in, you can leave it open. Just because you say no doesn't mean it's a no forever. So you could say, I don't want to be involved with the course this year, but maybe next year when you're planning, I may be interested, so you can reach out to me then. You don't have to leave it open, but you can. And yeah, so that's my approach to kind of how you say no. I've said no to things and then been asked about 3 or 4 other times to do the same thing again. So I just found that I've had to be more and more definitive in my no's if I keep being asked. But I think it's hopefully the first time you say no, that'll be accepted, but sometimes that's not the case. And you just kind of continue to be stick to your kind of guns on it. I don't think you have to feel guilty about saying no. I think you just have to be firm in terms of your answers. Okay, availability. So we're all super busy. Nobody has time really to add anything in. But how do we approach that? So I think one of the places to look for that protected time or to ask how to protect your time is in your original contract. So when you're interviewing for jobs, when you get the contract for the job, you have to look at kind of what your commitments are. If you're community and it's purely clinical, like you look at what days you want to work, what the resources being offered. If you're academic, then you need to carve out time for that academic work. So whether that's having protected time written into your contract is helpful. But at the end of the day, you're the one who's going to protect your time. Nobody else is going to say, oh, sorry, we can't give you anything that day because that's your protected day, except for you. So having it put in the contract is helpful, but you have to protect it at the end of the day. The clinical, like I said, can easily take over. So it's making sure that you define time that's set aside for the other things that you have to do. And I think one of the most important thing is like have your people. So finding the people that are going to be on your side that you know have your back and are going to be there for you. So I think learning over time, and it could be a number of different ways. It could be a mentor, it could be your boss, it could be colleagues that are going to be there and kind of stand up for you in addition to yourself standing up. So I think one of the examples I have for that is my division head is great in terms of saying, well, no, because Ashley's the newest staff at a given point in time, she shouldn't have to do every single Christmas just because she's new and nobody else wants to do it. We're going to make a grid that it rotates so we all take a turn doing the Christmas break year after year. So I think I'm very fortunate that I have a group where that's the kind of model and the culture, but that's not going to be the case everywhere. So it's very hard if you're the new person coming into practice and the expectation is, well, you do the holidays every year because nobody else wants to and you're the newest person. So I think making sure you get a sense of who your colleagues are and kind of how they're going to help you is good. And then also learning who those people are in your group. So you can see, like, I'll offer to cover a call if people need it. But then you see over time, certain people may be the same 2 people that are always helping me out. And so it's not that you're going to help only those 2 people, but you may be more helpful to certain people in your group than others, or you may be a little bit kind of less hesitant until you see that you're getting it as a 2-way streak from other people in the group. So I think very important to know who those people are in your practice that you can rely on, and then they'll rely on you. And then blocking time. So like I said, you can put it in your contract, but how you actually block it. So I've heard of different ways of doing this. I usually try and block like a half day or a day a week where I can actually get my billings done, my paperwork done, read over like stuff for committees that I have to go to, work on kind of reviewing research projects with residents. So I try and set aside that time each week. It's hard, but I try and block that time. And then there may be meetings as well that you have to schedule in. So you may say, like, I don't want meetings every day of the week. My time for meetings is going to be this Monday afternoon, and that's when I'm going to meet. Easier said than done, because there's definitely time creep across all these areas. Other people I know say that every 2 or 3 months, they book a week off, basically, where they schedule nothing in that time except for them to sit at their desk and get all their paperwork and tidy up all their things that they have to do. Again, hard to book a week off to do that, but I think you have to look at a way that's going to work for you for blocking off some time during a given week to do the other things that you have to do on top of the clinical work or the academic work that you have, or to get the academic work done. And then obviously making time for yourself, your family, if you're exhausted post-call. So you need to think about how to put that time in. I think as a resident, it was very rare that I was like, oh, I'm going to set this time aside to go to the gym, because like I just had to work on everybody else's schedule. I had to work on everybody else's call schedule. But that's something I started as staff, is like I said, okay, I can put in a run, like go for a run these days. I started doing photography. So I picked up a hobby and I was like, I'm going to do this. And I love to travel. So where can I work a place in my schedule where I can take vacation? And I think that we don't prioritize those things, especially when you start on staff. I think I took probably 6 months to a year working before I took a vacation, because I didn't want to seem like I was just like starting and now I'm taking off. But there's no reason to feel like that. Like everybody has to take time for themselves and protect your time. So I think that's extremely important. I think that the culture is getting better, that we're more open to that. Like I see now even like residents taking these great vacations, and like I feel like that was not something that I did at the time. So I think the culture is changing, that we're kind of more accepting of like taking time for yourself and your family, but you need to prioritize that. One of my partners coaches their son's competitive baseball, and basically 3:30 every day they're done. So they don't do any meetings in the evenings. They do all their meetings at 7 a.m. And obviously this person's in more of like a leadership position where they have a little bit more control, but it's just like a great example of somebody prioritizing their home life and still taking care of their patients and being productive. But you just have to look at how that's going to work into your schedule. And it's very hard when you're starting to want to ask for those things or to kind of feel like you're being selfish, but you're not. You're going to burn out and not have a sustainable career if you don't make time to take care of yourself and your family. And then being able, I think this should go without saying, but it's definitely something that needs to be focused on, because I think that we all need to strive to be excellent surgeons and take excellent care of our patients. But it often is kind of an afterthought when you're doing all these other things. And I think that as a resident, you get this ongoing educational experience, and as a fellow, this ongoing experience where you're working with different staff, you're learning constantly. And then when you're a surgeon, you're on your own. Like you're not learning anymore unless you put effort into it. So you're doing the technique that you know how to do. You're doing the same thing every time. I'm fortunate because I do have residents that come through and they're like, hey, why don't they do this differently somewhere else? Like, would you consider doing this? And I'm like, that's great. Like I get to learn all the time, but I don't get to go and work with somebody else anymore. I can choose to. So, I mean, I think you should take opportunities, scrub with a partner when you start, see what they're doing, learn different ways of doing things. I think I did that when I started, and I actually do a lot of the things the same way one of my partners does, even though I did a fellowship in between. So I think that you can still learn from other people, but you have to look for those opportunities to remain at the best in terms of your surgical expertise and technique. And so to keep learning, you have to take all the opportunities that you can. So whether it's conferences, whether it's courses, you can do a graduate degree if you have any interest in that in terms of getting expertise kind of in a academic domain. And then really, looking for those opportunities. There's a ton of them. There's a ton of courses. You can look on OMA, American College of Surgeons, CMA. There's like all kinds of opportunities that exist, and conferences to keep up with the latest evidence. So I think those things are all really great in terms of continuing education. And then like back to what I said, don't let it consume your life. So again, you have to look at kind of where you can have positive things in your life outside of work. So many of us think that this is a calling or like a job that we're so committed to, which is fantastic, but you have to look at what's outside of that as well to keep you grounded. And then the last thing is there are professional coaches. So I know that a few people in leadership positions have had professional coaches offered to them to like take on those leadership positions. But then I've also been offered opportunities. I was set up with a professional coach that was taking classes to learn how to do it independently. So they did it. You do have to pay for it, but I was offered it at a reduced rate. And so that can be helpful in terms of kind of dealing with either specific kind of difficulties you're having around kind of communication or with specific people you work with, or on a larger scale in terms of determining your vision and your goals. It's kind of like having a psychiatrist or psychologist for work. But that can be helpful. It can be expensive, but I think you can ask mentors and colleagues what opportunities or who they know to help you get set up if you are looking for additional help in terms of that in your career. Not something I ever knew about as a resident, but I know people who've had a lot of success working with professional coaches. So that's it. So I hope that gives you some view into like what I've been through and kind of how to learn from my mistakes and successes. Happy to answer any questions if anybody has. So yeah, the question was my experience with a professional coach. I guess not necessarily in the realm of like surgical coaching specific, but this was more in terms of like I guess, career management, in terms of dealing with conflict, communication, basically any topic I wanted to bring up, I could bring up with a coach. So usually, and I think it's different, it's probably like worth finding, like you may have to try a few coaches to get a good fit because not everybody's going to be a good fit for everybody. And I think I've had different experiences than some of my partners have had with a coach. So I found it was usually trying to identify like a specific issue that I wanted to address. And it could be I actually remember talking about, I want to stop doing this role. So it is actually like very specific to this. And I talked about like, how do I approach like handing on or getting rid of this role. And so the coach helped me brainstorm. It was very self-led. So they were more there to kind of support my own like dialogue and thought process and for me to come up with solutions. It's meant to be like more of a self-sustaining process that they kind of help you get to the point where you can figure out your own solutions or how something may play out if you're going to choose X, Y, or Z. I've had other colleagues that have had more of like an advisory coach where they were like, oh, I see that you're like dealing with this and these are a few ways that you can approach that. So it just depends what's going to be the best fit for you in terms of finding a coach who has the same kind of style. But I found it was a lot of kind of like talking through and making a plan of how I was going to deal with different interactions or situations, which is helpful. I think that I don't do it regularly. Like I haven't done it for a little while because it was specific to certain kind of like incidents. And so I think for me, it was good if I had something that was coming up or I was having a hard time dealing with, to interact with a coach at that given time. Whereas some people may benefit from kind of like a longitudinal experience in terms of just helping them kind of establish their career and deal with colleagues and kind of challenges.
You've been listening to Cold Steel, the official podcast of the Canadian Journal of Surgery. If you have comments or questions, please email us at podcast.cjs@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.